Today I have a little surprise for you, and because I have a special guest, I welcome you to the English episode of the Work in Sports podcast. We'll be diving into the incredible career of Priscilla Janssens, a true force in football for over 2 decades. From her early days at AFC Ajax to becoming the first female UEFA Venue Director, Priscilla's journey is nothing but inspiring. We'll be chatting about her groundbreaking experiences, memorable moments, and the global impact she's had on women's football. Stay tuned for a fascinating conversation with Priscilla. Hello everyone, my name is Agata Jurek and you're listening to the English episode of the Work in Sports podcast. With 12 years of experience in European football, I'm here to share the secrets of building a successful career in the sports industry. Together with my guests, we'll answer questions how to start working in sports and how to successfully grow your career and continue to elevate your skills. Get ready for inspiring talks and practical tips. Welcome to the Work in Sports podcast. Hi, Priscilla.
Hi, Agatha.
I'm super happy to have you here today. You know that I launched my podcast not long ago, but this will be the very first English episode. So no pressure here, but let's see what listeners say after this one.
I feel honored.
But super happy to have you here.
Yeah, me too.
Because I do know your story a little bit. And it's, as I mentioned, nothing but inspiring. So I'm happy for the listeners to have a look into it.
Thank you very much.
So can you share with me, how did your career in sport started?
Yeah, so I've always done a lot of sports myself from being a young kid. I used to play football until I was about 14, 15. But at that time, I grew up in the Netherlands from the age of 8. And there was no structure for women's football, girls' football at the time. So I stopped playing when I was about 14. But I always did other sports. I played tennis, I played squash, box, so all different sports. So I was always into sports. And I studied at University International Communication. And my plan was to go and work for the UN. And I did my internship in Kenya, in Nairobi. And actually, to be fair, I was really disappointed by the behavior of UN people. So they had number plates, license plates with UN and then a number. So they would park wherever they want. I could see them in the bar with young girls on their laps. And I was really disappointed. And I decided then and there that I didn't want to work for the UN anymore. However, I was at the end of my study. I was doing my internship and I was writing my thesis. So I finished that. I got my diploma. And then I didn't really know what to do. So I decided I was going to work for a temp agency for temporary work. And then I would see all the jobs come by. So I worked for the agency itself. And because I always had done a lot of sports and I was into sports, my clients were Ajax from Amsterdam and the Amsterdam Arena, the stadium of Ajax, which is a separate company. And we were the first stadium to actually organize stewarding at the stadium. So before that, there was always a very aggressive approach to fans going to the stadium. There would be police, there would be horses. And when the arena was built, it was the stadium that decided for a whole different approach to approach people coming to the stadium, the fans, as if they're guests at a theater. So the stewards would be in a nice suit and hoping that then the fans would have a different approach. And they did, which was good. And my job was from the temp agency to have a group of people working as stewards. So I did that for 1.5 years and working there next to Ajax. It was also the time of the Bosman arrest when there was a huge influx of very young players from all around the world coming to Ajax. So 15, 16, 17 years old from Africa, from South America, from Australia. And I lived in South America until I was 8. So I knew the cultures. My mom is from East Africa. So I have a mixed background. I speak some languages. And soon enough, the players found me to help them translate their letters from the government or from the city or from the club and just help them out with all general things.
And this is how you became the player's manager.
That's how I became, like a player's assistant, player management in Ajax. They asked me to come and work for them because after 1.5 years, I was done with the temp work and I started working at Ajax for 5 years. We also had host families. And basically, I started doing the whole international part. I was translating press conferences for Champions League. When there was an international scout or teams, I would be with them as team liaison and I would drive them around, the families of the players that were visiting. So I worked with some pretty interesting players like Zlatan, you might have heard of.
Yes, I did.
Somewhere, Maxwell, Kivu. So these were players that often it was their first contract outside of their own country and they would come to Ajax as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, young kids.
So it must have been a dream job for a young woman passionate about sports, no?
It was. I was very lucky. And I have to say, I've always been very, very lucky with my jobs because I was 27, 28. And I was free as a bird. I had a car from the club and I was driving around. My boss was the technical director who had definitely other and better things to do than chase me, what I was doing. So as long as I was delivering and then the players were happy, then I was free as a bird. But I often would get phone calls in the middle of the night, like the key has broken in the lock or, players. I love the players, but they can be big kids as well. So like I had a player who bought a goldfish about a week before going on holiday for 4 weeks. So I ended up with the goldfish on my lap, driving back to the stadium, and I had the goldfish on my desk for 4 weeks, taking care of the goldfish. And so a lot of funny stories with things that happened with the boys. Not so much anymore because the time, of course, is further away. But I used to meet up with them at different matches when I was working as a venue director. And it was always great to see them. And they would always say that they saw me as their big sister, taking care of them, but also like a confidant. I wasn't the coach. I wasn't the team manager. I wasn't somebody who was going to decide whether they could play. So they would come to me with, if their mom was ill or they were homesick or they were just depressed because they were not playing, like they would show up in my office and I would like pat them on the back and get them a cup of tea and we'd talk about it.
Well, this all sounds incredible. I'm sure there are many more fascinating stories you could share.
Yes, many stories. Some not to be shared, but a lot of good and funny stories. And just in general, I mean, these are young boys who are far away from home. And so they get in a lot of trouble that other boys get in trouble at that age. And then these are kids that also have their first contract, often fast cars. So you can just imagine all the trouble they get in. But it's, it's fun.
But do you think this experience had a huge impact on your career? And did it help you to, in the future, land this position of first female UEFA Venue Director?
Yes, I think I was very lucky because I have worked for a club at Ajax. I've worked for a federation, for the Dutch Football Federation. I've worked for UEFA and for FIFA. So the great thing is I've seen football from a lot of different sides. So I've seen it from the side of a team, also working as a team liaison officer. So you understand how a club works, what the schedule is of a club, of a coach, when to approach the coach with questions and when not. So you understand the dynamics of a football team. And then I also understand the dynamics of the club. I understand the dynamics of a football federation who have different interests, different dynamics, different politics that they need to care about. And of course, UEFA and FIFA, again, looking at the European scale and the global scale, is also a different perspective. And working in all the different fields has helped me to understand much better the other side of the table. Now, working as a venue director, I understand very much the clubs and when to approach them about something, what I can ask, what I cannot ask.
Can you explain to the listeners a little bit more about what the role of the venue director is? Because unlike myself, where I work in the, let's say, overall organization of the event, hospitality areas, ceremonies, you are really focused on the sports domain.
Yes. So after I worked at Ajax, I went to Portugal and I worked for the Euro 2004, the men's Euro. And I was in charge of the teams. So I did that for 6 months. I lived in Portugal. So that was the next step in my career. And then when the tournament ended in August, head of tournaments, Martin Cullen of UEFA, asked me to come and work at UEFA. And I said I didn't want to live in Switzerland. And he was very surprised. So he said, why don't you want to live in Switzerland? I said, because it's too cold. And it was too cold. And also the culture is not very close to my heart. But it was interesting because then he said, so how can we keep working together? And I said, I had seen the venue teams at Ajax. So I said, I want to be a venue director. And he was really surprised. And he said, but we don't have a female venue director. So I said, I'll be the first one. For me, it was totally logical. I was like, so?
Obviously. Why not?
I was like, I'll be the first one. And he and I got along very well. And he's a great guy. He sort of looked at me and then he said, okay. And he put me on the list. And of course, the list goes back to UEFA and I got bumped off the list. And he put me back on the list. I got bumped off again. It was like 3 times. But then I stayed on the list. And that's how I became the first female venue director back in the days when there were maybe only 40. So it was, now there are probably 140, but there were like 40. And the venue director, especially at that time, was the leader of the venue team. So if the club wanted to communicate anything to UEFA, it would go through the venue director and we would pass it on and we would lead our team. But apart from being that team leader, our focus was and is very much, as you say, the footballing part. So we are in contact with both teams, we are in contact with the referees, and we are in charge of anything that's directly related to the football. So you can imagine the pitch, literally the height of the grass, the watering of the grass, the lines, even the width of the lines, the goalposts, whether they're upright, if they're up straight, the size of the goal, anything happening right around the pitch, the camera positions, any marketing programs that are happening around the pitch, and then the whole schedule for the teams, like when do they arrive to the stadium the day before the match, the trainings, the press conferences, anything directly related to the match, to the teams, the referees. And then on match day, we make a full countdown to kickoff, which basically kicks in the moment they leave the hotels. So that's when the countdown starts, what the timing of the teams and the referees leaving the hotels, arriving to the stadium, starting the warming up, ending up the warming up, the pitch watering that happens in between, the floodlights going on, and then there's a full countdown, almost second to second, when the teams come out of the dressing room, walk on the pitch, when the anthem starts, and then I give the referee the signal to start the match, which is crucial that it starts exactly on time.
You mentioned that you were brave enough to be the one to ask the question, or actually to ask for a non-existing position of a female venue director. That was a bold move. And having this in mind, what would you say to the people aspiring to work in sports? In your opinion, what are the skills and character traits that you need in order to be successful in this industry?
Yeah, so at the time, I didn't know there wasn't a female venue director. So for me, it was very logical to ask to be a venue director. And to be honest, up to today, I really don't understand why it would be a male or a female, because we are not in the dressing rooms. And I think in any other sports, it wouldn't be so much of a sort of topic as it is in football, because football is so male dominated. In terms of character skills, I think obviously you need to be very, very organized, as in any event job. I mean, in your own job, you need to be very organized. You need to be able to handle stress. So what that means is that if there is pressure, you still know what you need to focus on. You don't get distracted all the time, because we are in an office and there's oftentimes people walking in and people come with questions. And if you go from one thing to the other, you will lose focus of what you actually need to be doing. So I think that is a big part. And then also at the same time being flexible. Things change. You have a plan and then life happens. And especially in events, this happens all the time. Like you'll think you're going to have a quiet day. It's going to be a quiet match. And then suddenly there's fighting outside of the stadium, or the weather starts pouring down. I was in Iceland and we had snowstorms during the match. And you need to be prepared, which is another very important thing, to be prepared and to always try and think 1 or 2 steps ahead. Mm-hmm. So if you are in Iceland, you'll have your equipment ready. You'll have the winter balls ready. You need to have the brushes ready to clean the pitch. And you need to be flexible. And that again goes towards not having stress when things happen quickly, but at the same time being able to focus and to set priorities. So what is it I need to do first? And I find in people who are starting that is often something they struggle with, setting priorities, because there is so much that needs to happen and often at the same time that it's difficult to set priorities, especially when people start talking to you and distracting you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think being able to be stress resistant is super important.
And that comes also with experience, I have to say, because as you get more experienced, you don't get stressed so quickly, because you've seen the situation before. And I think also you are able to put things into perspective. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, we're not solving world hunger, and if you can have that kind of perspective, like, okay, I'm doing my best and I'm doing what I can, but, that person shouting at me needs to calm down, and then I'm going to do what they might want me to do. But also authority comes with experience. I think if you are more experienced, then it's easier to be more stress resistant, to be calmer, because you know what you're doing. And the person opposite the table from you can see that you know what you're doing. The worst thing we can do in our jobs is run around. If we are running through the tunnel, everybody thinks something is wrong. So even if something is wrong, you try and stay calm and pretend that you know exactly, you have it all under control, even though in your head you're like, oh, shit.
Going through 10 different scenarios.
Yes.
Okay. So Priscilla, you're also a freelancer for FIFA. You have worked for the Olympics. Can you tell me what are the differences of working for the club tournaments and for others?
Yeah, I started working for FIFA in 2015, which was the Women's World Cup in Canada. And by now, I've done 3 Women's World Cups. So I was really lucky. I did the Women's World Cup in Canada, in France, and in Australia recently this summer. 3 very different tournaments, really interesting. And I did 2 Men's World Cups in Russia and in Qatar. And I've done 2 Olympics in Brazil and in Tokyo, and I'll be doing the Paris one. So
Sorry, I need to interrupt you. Do you have like a map of all the countries that you have been to, pinned anything on the walls? Because I don't know, you have mentioned so many of them.
Yeah, I don't.
How many languages do you speak?
7, yeah. Which helps a lot. And that actually is a good bridge to the FIFA work. What I really like in the FIFA work is that you're dealing with countries from all over the world, obviously, because they're World Cups or Olympics. So in club football, especially I think in Europe, and especially in Champions League, all the clubs have a certain level of organization. You can expect a minimum standard of organization, which is quite high. In FIFA tournaments, you don't know. I've had situations where a country showed up with half the kit or with a completely different color than they had sent beforehand for inspection. I've had situations where we would have, for a tournament, they'd have sleeve patches, they're small sleeve patches, and we would give them a heat press machine to put them on. So that heat press machine is like probably 6 by 6 centimeters to put the patch on. And they were using that to put the names on the back. Now, you have to understand that that machine is not big enough and not hot enough for names on the back of shirts. So we had players who at the beginning of the hallway were called Miranda, and at the end of the hallway they were called Anda, because MIR had fallen off the shirt. And that's the things you deal with in FIFA tournaments, which on the one hand is super challenging because you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if the players that show up are the ones that you've been told are going to show up. So we are much more involved with the teams. We do something called team arrival meetings. So that's a team arrival meeting is a meeting like a presentation we do for the full squad with the technical staff, all the players there. And then we have an administrative meeting and we check all the passports, for instance. So that we never do at a UEFA tournament. So you're very much involved with the teams. You're often helping them much more, especially when you get the much less experienced teams. And the delegations are very big because it's a big tournament. Plus, that obviously, and especially at the big tournaments, the pressure is super high. You know, you get a World Cup, every match matters 100%. The pressure is much higher. If you have a men's World Cup and you realize that even the smallest match, there's maybe 200 million people watching it. You know, the dimension is just something completely different to club football. And also, I mean, in club football, the group stage is 6 matches for a club. In a World Cup, the group stage is 3 matches. So every match is huge and it counts. And you get the fans, you know, from all over the world, which is amazing. I love having all the inexperienced teams, and you get teams from all over the world. You'll get like even the mixes, you'll get like Brazil against Zambia, you know, like stuff, and you just experience completely different things. You get the South Africans singing, coming into the stadium singing, and it's just very, very, very cool. It's completely different to club football. Plus, in terms of organization, when it's a tournament where, as in FIFA, it's called a match director, sort of the same job. It's a little bit bigger, but sort of the same job. And we're then in one stadium for 4 or 5 weeks, however long the tournament is there. And we're in charge of all the matches at that stadium. So we're based at one stadium, which is different than in club football, where you're for 3-4 days at one stadium and then you leave for one match. There, you're there. And for instance, in Qatar, we had 8 matches in, I think, 14 days. So it's like nonstop.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Speaking of different countries around the world, you are also an UEFA assist expert. So where you approach the challenge of promoting women's football and women in football on a global scale. And you've been to very distant parts of the world with this mission, right?
Yeah, so UEFA Assist is a program that UEFA has developed to basically, as it says, assist federations outside of Europe. So the federations can ask for help in certain areas, can be league development and different areas. And one of the areas is women's football and women in football, which obviously are 2 completely different topics, but still they're put into one program. So they will go to their confederation and ask for this, and then their confederation will go to the European Confederation, UEFA. And then if it is approved, and the most important reason for it to be approved is that UEFA feels that that federation really wants to do it. They are motivated to put steps towards developing these areas. Then what we do is I'm one of the experts for UEFA Assist in this field. The reason is because I set up the Women's League in the Netherlands. That's when I was working for the federation. So I set up I was the founder, one of the founders of the Women's League in the Netherlands. So I worked in women's football from 2005 until 2011. So 6-7 years I worked in women's football. And I was manager of the league. And then later on, I also was part of the working group for bids for Women's Euros. And then going back to UEFA Assist, so what we will do before we go to a country, and I personally have done this in Peru, in Ecuador, in Uruguay, and in Japan. So very different countries. We will do an evaluation of the situation in that country, and we do that by looking at documents, but also by doing different interviews with people, like it could be a head of women's football or a player or a coach. And then we also do surveys. And the surveys are anonymous, And we do those with players, with coaches, with the media, with sponsors, and maybe the federation people. And with all that information we have, we think a good and fair idea of what's really going on in that field. Then we go to the country and do 4 days of workshops. And the 2 first days is only with women, and it's very much focused on women empowerment. So what are the barriers that they're facing? What can they do about that? What is the culture they're working in? All things like that. And also creating a network of these women, because oftentimes they know about each other, but they don't know each other. And even having that network is already powerful. Like they'll set up a WhatsApp group and they'll be able to help each other and empower each other after that. The second 2 days is with the federation. For instance, we try to get the director there, the general secretary. And the goal is really to end up with an operational plan. So where there's very concrete steps that we agree on, and they are the ones who come up with their goals. So it's not us telling them what to do. They tell us what they want to achieve. And it's with KPIs, with deadlines, who's responsible. So it's very, very specific. And they might not be done after the 2 days. So then they need to develop that further, and it needs to be approved by their exco. And then we leave. And then there's 6 months of mentoring that follows that. So I think it's a really good program, and countries have taken big steps with women's football. And as you see now at the Women's World Cup, there's all these new countries really taking steps in women's football and getting success with it. So that's really great to see. And the old legends need to step up. The big countries need to keep developing. Like you see the US is under fire. You know, Germany used to be a big footballing country for women, Sweden, the Netherlands, and everybody needs to keep developing because they're starting to being caught up by other countries, which is great.
Speaking of development and change, you having so many years of experience, in what ways has the landscape of football and sport management changed during this time? And how do you adapt to these changes?
So I think in my field, I mean, looking at football, there's obviously over the years, I've now been a venue director this is my 20th season, and it's my 25th season in football. There's more and more matches. I think that is the biggest change. When I started, we only had men's Champions League. And like I say, there were 40 venue directors. Now you have Europa League, you have Conference League, you have Women's Champions League. Next year, we're going to have the second tier Champions League for women. We have Nations League, we have Friendly. There's so many matches that it is nonstop. I mean, football is nonstop nowadays. And I think also it's become more and more global. I mean, we're at Man City. I mean, those matches are being broadcasted all over the world. And it didn't used to be like that. So I think in our jobs, we need to more and more think on a global scale. And we need to, depending very much in which tier of tournaments we're working, we need to be prepared for clubs that are very inexperienced and help them develop and help them make steps. And of course, women's football is a whole new field for us as well in our jobs. We never used to work in women's football from a UEFA perspective in club football, which is a whole new world that's opening up, and it's getting bigger and bigger.
What about the advancements of technology? So do you find it challenging to balance the tradition and the innovation?
Yeah, I mean, for me, not, but I do find football in itself is very, very conservative. And if you see the development of technology over the last years, I mean, in the FIFA tournaments, we used to have one person who was doing the VAR, which was like the VAR operator. And now we have a football technology manager. And that person sits next to me on the bench just to show how important that a person is. Because in the big tournaments and even in the club tournaments now, when you get to the knockout stage, you don't just have VAR, you have goal line technology, you have the player tracking system, EPTS, you have the medical review tablets, which the teams have on the bench, which is for the doctors, and they are connected to somebody, their assistants in the press tribune who have a medical review tablet. So there's more and more technology, which is normal, and it will develop even further, I'm sure. And I think as long as the teams see the added value for them, which they definitely see with things as the goal line technology and as things, the player tracking system and the medical review, I mean, those are things that are put in place for them and to make the game safer, especially the medical review. So they're happy with it and they're happy to implement it.
As you are now embarking on your 20th season, what legacy do you hope to leave behind, both for yourself and future generations of sport managers?
Yeah, so this is my 20th season. And actually when the season started and I was like, how many seasons? 20. I couldn't believe it that it was my 20th season. I remember when I started and I was like, oh, if I can only get to 10, that would be amazing. And now it's 20. And I think in terms of legacy, even though when I started, I never realized there was no female venue director, I think being the first has opened up the door for more. I mean, when you're the first and you do well, which I think I did, it goes to show that it's not a problem to have a female venue director, but you need somebody to be first. And I was, by chance, happened to be the first. So I'm hoping to open up the door for even more female venue directors. I always believe in wherever surrounding that mixed teams are the strongest. Not only women, not only men, but the mix makes the team the strongest. Just as a mix of different cultures, different languages, different backgrounds makes a team strongest. So in that sense, I'm hoping to see even more female venue directors and match directors in the future. And I'm hoping to see men match directors. This is more for the FIFA tournaments, also in the women's tournaments, because now there's only women in the women's tournaments. So it would be great if gender is no longer something to talk about, but it's just logical that you have mixed teams. And I think that would, for me, be best. And I think it will help also the sport when there's more, let's say, female influence in this very still male-dominated and conservative sports.
I'm in my 10th season of Champions League right now, and although we work in a bit different domains, I'm still happy that I can look up to a person like you, and that I have a pleasure to work with you. And thank you so much, Priscilla. It was a pleasure to
You're
chat.
making me blush. Thank you very much. Thank you, Agatha. It's my pleasure.
That's all for today, and if you enjoyed this episode, and if you would like to listen more in English, please drop me a message on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can find links in the show notes. Until next time.